Welcome back to this old rusty shit box. Today we have a 2007 Chevy Equinox. Now before I get 1,000 comments from all the people that I told I don't do rust work, there is one way I will consider it. And that is, well, step one is you buy one of my rebuilds. Step 2 through 12, just continue buying my rebuilds. Once you get to 12, if you have some rust work, send it to me and I will take a look at it and I will consider it. Still may say no. I think you have to get to like 50 before I'm required to say yes to rust work. So this one, they need to get a couple more years out of it, and I told them to fix it the right way. It's going to cost more than this thing is worth. It needs frame rails front to back to fix it the right way. So we're going to hack it. We're going to do the best we can. Is it going to be as good as it was from the factory? Probably not. Is it as good as it is from the factory right now? Absolutely not. Will it be better to fix it the way we're going to fix it than have the engine puke out when you hit the gas? Well, I would like to see that, so maybe that would be better, but the owner wouldn't like it. I want to see it, but they don't. So we're just going to do our best to put it back together, save them some money, and hopefully they get a couple more years out of it. So we also have to put some wheel bearings in the front of this thing, but that's the least of our worries compared to the rest of our mess up here. So if you're wondering, of those 12 rebuilds they bought from me, 11 of them are still on the road. One of them didn't make it. Somebody turned in front of them and that went on a terrain heaven. And they sold off 3, so they still have 8 of my rebuilds in their driveways. And some of them are almost 20 years old, which is amazing because rebuilt cars are never the same. They don't last. At least that's what I'm told. But I mean, clearly this is definitely because of the rebuild, not because we live in rusty Illinois. Even though I didn't work on this part, definitely part of the rebuild. I actually put the bumper, headlight, and a fender on it. That's really all I did for the rebuild. And then I actually put a lift gate and taillights and a rear bumper on it when a Mustang lost control, went through a ditch, through a fence, and then hit the back of the car. So enough about this car. Let's figure out how we're going to fix it. So I did get some parts from, well, this guy really hooked me up. Got a bunch of Emporiums. They're not from an Equinox, but I think they'll work. Here's what we're dealing with. You have an inspection port here. There's supposed to be a little inspection port right here. So we need to replace a portion of this. And there's also a perch. And you can see it's got a hole rusted in it. That perch just gets welded on there. So it looks like this inner rail here, I think it goes all the way to the front, is going to be okay. We can just put our little perch on here. I'm not sure where this piece is. We may have to put something in there. And I'm not going to replace this entire rail all the way back here. Because in order to do that, the engine has to come out, dash has to come out. Yeah, it's not worth it. They did just have a new transmission put in it. Well, rebuilt for the second time. And the transmission shop told them they had to get rid of this thing. So they were afraid to drive it. I don't blame them, because this is the good side. There's the not so good side. You can see they bent this up so that they can get a nut back there, because on this side this little perch is completely collapsed. There's nothing left of it. So we're definitely going to have to fix that one. So let's get to fixing it. We do give the trend shop points for creativity. You put a, looks like a drive axle nut in there as a spacer, and that's where the cage nut should be, but they moved the cage nut up on top. That's the inner frame rail there. There was still some support because there was nothing left of this bottom piece. And they did what they had to do to get it to me. Good on them. So this is what it's supposed to look like. We're supposed to have a little window down here. There's supposed to be a cage nut in there so that we can just bolt it in. All that's rusted away. So we're gonna have to take a little piece out of here, make our new side, and then we'll take, this is flipped over, so this is the little perch. We should be able to just drill out these spot welds, put this little perch on the bottom, and call it a day. That's my theory anyway. So let's get into it and find out if my theory is correct. These are pretty cheap because, well, they're damaged. This one, no good, and this one's got a wrinkle over here. So cut it off, and wasn't gonna use it anyway. Perfect to replace that little piece. The first thing we need to do is make a little room so we can see what we're working on. So I have my belt tensioner tool, and I'm just gonna release the tension and pull the belt off. That's a multi-purpose belt tensioner tool. But it works. So once our belt's off, we can unplug our compressor and unbolt our compressor. It's right in front of that little perch that we're going to be trying to replace. So if we take this out of the way, we'll have direct access to it. We don't have to discharge the air conditioning. We're just going to push it up out of the way. Little dog bone that sits back there and waits to fall on your head. So we'll tuck this thing up here. Hopefully if we put it up here on top of the radiator hose, it'll stay up there. We'll find out. And now we can see what we're working on. We're going to scribe some lines in our frame rail here so we know where our new piece goes. It'll end up exactly where the old one was. Basically just carving up some rust at this point. Not much paint or metal to scrape. And now we can start drilling our piece off of our parts. I'm going to start with a 1/8 inch drill bit just to drill some pilot holes. It's a lot faster than drilling everything with a 5/16. The bits last a lot longer. And the little 1/8 inch never go dull for some reason. Once we have all our pilot holes drilled, we can go back over them with our 5/16 drill bit. Just a regular drill bit, it's not flat tipped because I don't care what I do to the piece underneath it, I'm not using it anyway. Except for the piece on the bottom, which I'll be able to weld through those holes. Now our piece is all drilled out, we'll loosen it up. It's thicker metal, so if we just hit the metal itself, it breaks a lot of the welds loose, and we don't have to get our breaker in there. But there were a couple that didn't give up, so we'll have to use the breaker on those. One last one. There's always one. And our piece is off. That's what it's supposed to look like when the metal termites haven't eaten it away. Now that we have our piece off there, we know what it looks like. We're going to pull our car apart. We'll unbolt the subframe, just prying down on that little, what's supposed to be a captured nut. Just a whole little tension on it so I can spin the bolt out of it. I'm trying to get the rest of that nut out of there before it ends up rattling around in the frame rail. And file. Now we'll pull our drive axle nut out of here. Not where you normally find a drive axle nut, but it did the job, so. Now we can pull the bottom of that perch out. It's not supposed to be like that. And we got a stand holding our subframe up, just in case. Hey, we got some help today. We even have a supervisor with us, so no breaks today. We'll have to cram the die grinder up there so we can grind out these spot welds. This would be one of those times where I would agree with the belt sanding people that the belt sander would definitely be easier for this, but I didn't bring it with me today, so we're going to have to make the die grinder work. Drill out a couple spot welds that go all the way through. And we'll put a rough cut in our piece just so we're working with some smaller pieces. We'll end up cutting more off later, but this allows me just to get this end off. We'll drill our 5/16 holes, and now we can separate this piece. Not much holding it on, just thoughts and prayers. Now we brought out our favorite tool to get the rest of it loose. I'm going to mangle this piece up pretty bad, but it's coming off. Pretty thick stuff, so it peels right off the frame rail. And on the left is what our old one looks like, and on the right is what our new one is going to look like. And they should both look the same. One's from Mississippi, one's from Illinois. Now we can go ahead and cut the outer piece where we're going to put it in. We're going to overlap the top of it, and then we're just going to butt weld the sides of it. I'm going to cut around that little stud there because there's a hole in our other frame rail. It doesn't have a stud, but it has a hole in the same place. So I'll be able to line that up and get it back in the right spot. Drill out the 2 spot welds. Go in the other piece of the frame rail and wiggle our piece off of here. Got a little trimming to do, but we'll make it fit in there. Now I use the other piece as a template, put it up there, and then just mark the 2 edges where I need to worry about the cuts. And then just cut a straight line above the rust. We don't care about the top because it's going to be overlapped anyway. I trimmed this piece down a little bit, but since I'm going to use a stud, it's a little bit too long to get it in there. So one trick to being able to cut it off and keep our threads is you run a nut all the way down on it, cut it off. Now you don't have to worry about if you messed up the threads, because when we spin the nut back off of there, it straightens them all out. We ground off all of our paint and put our weld through primer on. Now we're going to put that stud through that hole and line up the hole in the back. That's where our fender liner goes. And we'll have a little bit of an overlap. Sneak it in here. This is why we had to cut that stud a little shorter. Now it's in there. Put our nut back on here. Very carefully, in case we didn't straighten those threads all the way out. Get it lined up. And we're actually going to use that stud to tighten this up and draw that piece in there. So where it belongs, so tighten it all the way up. A couple of clamps on there, so now we can just weld it up. Once it's welded up, we can put our little pedestal in here. Put the bolt in, make sure we got it in the right spot. We don't want to weld it in and then find out that our subframe doesn't fit. Now I'm going to raise the stand and push the subframe up so that it pushes that piece tight up against our frame rail. Tap it into place, get everything nice and tight in there. And we can clamp it up and then weld it all up. Once it's all welded up, we can grind it all down, put some paint and primer on there, and put it all back together. And now over to the other side. We're going to do it similar, but a little bit different. Start out by pulling our bolt out of here. Just the urge to use our fingers to hold that nut. And now we're going to cut our piece out. There's a little bit more to cut on this. There's a little more rust on the outside of this one. A little more rust on the perch on the other side. We can drill out our spot welds. Now we'll use our favorite tool to knock this piece out of here and make a big dusty mess of rust. Relax, safety experts. I know I'm not wearing gloves. The supervisor's been barking at me all day about it. There's always that one spot weld that doesn't want to play nice. I think it's rusty at this point. Now we can take our die grinder and cut some more of it off. We're going to cut that little piece on the inside off. And we'll knock it loose. Get it out of here somehow. Now we have our new outside piece all trimmed and ready to go in here. This one doesn't have studs. This one has a couple nuts that are welded on the backside and bolts that go through it. So we drilled holes in our original frame rail Now we can just put bolts in it and draw that piece in, hold it in there nice and tight so we can weld it up, and we'll just leave the bolts in there. This actually holds a little bracket on there. The newer style ones have that bracket on there, and it's supposed to, if it gets hit, keep the car that's hitting it from hitting the tire directly. It kind of like glances off that little bracket. I guess it wasn't a concern back then, but apparently after 2014 it was. Tighten up our bolts, move it around a little bit more, clamp up the back side, and then tighten it up one last time. That's where it's staying. So now we got the outside of it all welded up. Slide our piece in here, put our bolt in, make sure it's in the right spot. Clamp it all up. And everything's all welded. Grind all that down and make it pretty. And then we'll prime it all up. After it's all primed and painted, we're going to go ahead and throw some cavity wax inside the frame rails and all over everything else. We need to get it inside that frame rail because we do have those panels overlapped, so that's just a place for all that salt and slush to collect in there. So if we fill it with wax first, there'll be no place for it to collect. We're even going to coat the outside of it everywhere. This will probably be the last piece on the car left. Everything else will be rotted out. Now we're all done in there with our repair, so we can throw our AC compressor back in. I had to get these bolts in here before we get it up where it belongs because they're really long and don't fit otherwise. Stick our dog bone up behind it. Spacer for the top two bolts. Push the two bolts through and slide that over it. And push it up against the block and hope you don't have a wiring harness pinched in there. Start our bolts. Make sure you make the AC compressor installation face. This never works. Alright, I think we got them started. We're out of the woods. Check and make sure we don't have any wiring harness pinched up there. And over here we'll plug in our AC compressor. And then we can put our bolt in the bottom. That one's nice and easy. And tighten it all down to manufacturer specs. Click. As much as I would love to leave one side rust-proofed and one side bare metal to prove to all the doubters that rust-proofing does make a difference, I know it does, so I'm going to go ahead and rust-proof this side so that it lasts a lot longer than if I just left it alone. After all, that is why I'm doing this, because it wasn't rust-proof to begin with. So we're going to put our bolts back in that we used to hold that piece in. We have them. The holes are there. We might as well just use them. Besides, the welding experts will tell me my welds suck anyway, so that'll hold it together. Now we're all done. We can use our belt tensioner tool to release the tension on our tensioner. And slip our belt back over our pulley. We do have the tool for this. Left that at home, along with the belt sander. So you work with what you got. Pull our bungee cord off here that was holding our wheel liner up. The wheel liner has seen better days. And it looks like they didn't want to take the wheel liner off when they were using the torch on it. It's a little melted there. So we'll put back what push pins we have left. And hold what's left of this wheel liner in. And there's another cover that goes over the drive axle. That one's complete. Put all the push pins in that. Now we'll put our wheel liner back on the other side, complete with melted hole. Tuck underneath the bumper. And our other liner, shield, whatever you want to call it. Put that in. Now we're ready to do our wheel bearings. The easy part. I'm going to do this side while the supervisor does the other side. So first thing we're going to do is pull our caliper and bracket off. I'm just going to leave everything together. Pull it off as an assembly. Caliper back in a little bit. And we'll hang it up on our little hook. Bolt our drive axle nut. Unbolt our rotor from the hub. And now we can unbolt our hub from our knuckle. Somebody's been here before. This is way too easy. Tap our drive axle out. And it looks like we're getting the backing plate and everything. That's fine. We ground all the corrosion out of the inside of the knuckle. Now we're going to go ahead and throw some grease in there to hopefully slow it down, so that the next guy that's changing this wheel bearing has a much easier time of it. A little grease on the splines of the drive axle. It could slide together and apart at a later date. Slide our hub over our drive axle and starter bolts in the back of it. And then tighten them down. Our drive axle nut back on. Just snug it up and torque it down later. Put the rotor back on and bolt it on, and then drop our caliper on. Didn't even lose any brake pads. Put our caliper back in here. We can plug our ABS sensor back in, plug it into the harness, and then clip the harness into the backing plate. Well, I'm all finished with my side. How about you? Yeah, she's complaining it's a little hot. Probably shouldn't have worn that fur coat today. Fine, I'll finish it. Throw a rotor back on, throw a caliper back on. See if you had the hub in there? Just be the hard part. So we'll torque down our drive axles and throw our tires on, and we're all done. Of course, you find the supervisor sitting in the air conditioning. So I took it for a little ride, and our engine and trans is still securely fastened to the vehicle, and the wheel bearings are not growling anymore. So I think they're going to be good for another couple of years with this thing. I did a little checking because I've never seen one rot out quite like that. And what had happened is they brought it in for a transmission. I don't necessarily know that it needed a transmission. I was out of town, it was doing some funny things, probably low on fluid, and they sold them a transmission. When they went to take the trans out and drop the subframe, those captured nuts started to spin in there. So they heated them up, and when they did, they burned away all of the paint and everything else. They put it all back together and never put any wax in there or paint or treated it in any way. So it was just bare rusty metal that had been heated up, just exposed to the elements. Well, a couple of years later, all that salt and yummy stuff we find here in Illinois ended up getting in there and just rotting the thing out. When they took it back in to have the transmission replaced again under warranty, that's when they told them that it needs this subframe mounts, so they shouldn't even put a trans in. And the reason they were doing it under warranty is I don't think it needed a trans in the first place. They put it in, they give it back to them, and it was downshifting really hard. I mean, it was slamming into gear. And they told them that's normal, it just needed to break in. And I drove it and said that's not normal and it's not going to break in. It might break, but it's not going to break in. So I said make sure you take it back to them before the warranty runs out, because they're definitely going to have to redo it. So that's exactly what they did. They took it in just before the warranty ran out. Of course, they tried to tell them it was out of warranty, and
they had watched. So it wasn't out of warranty. Then they tried to get out of it because they didn't want to put it back in with the subframe that was going to fall out. So they were forced to do it anyway because that's not the owner's fault that the subframe is going to fall out. They still had to fix their problem from the last time. So they did. They brought it to me. We fixed the rest of it. So hopefully it lasts them a couple more years. So that explains why I've never seen this before and how it got like that. So I don't know that this is going to help anybody, but if yours happen to rot out like that, maybe you know how to repair it now. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.